Qasim, Sulaiman, it's a pleasure to speak to you both. This is the first time you ever speak publicly about really anything related to your father or anything at all. For anyone that doesn't know, especially those outside of Pakistan, your father, former Prime Minister Imran Khan, was jailed over a year ago now. I think I told you guys, I did an interview with him weeks beforehand on the day of the Russian mutiny. And it's one of the most emotional interviews I've ever done. And, most Pakistanis, most of the international community view this imprisonment as just a complete political witch hunt. And it seems as part of a broader, history of military control by the Pakistani military, or political control by the Pakistani military. That's essentially dominated the country's politics for decades now. I want to start with a tweet by your mother, Jemima. In the last few weeks, there have been serious and concerning developments regarding my son's father, Imran Khan's treatment in prison. The Pakistani authorities have stopped all visits to him by his family and his lawyers. They have also postponed all court hearings. In addition to cutting off in-person visits, and in defiance of a court order, his weekly calls to his sons, Sulaiman and Qasim Khan, you guys, who are British and who live in London, were stopped on the 10th of September. We've received reports that the authorities have now turned off the lights and electricity in Imran Khan's cell, and he's no longer allowed to leave his cell at any time. The jail cook has even been sent on leave. He's now completely isolated, in solitary confinement, literally in the dark, with no contact with the outside world. His lawyers are concerned about his safety and well-being. So that was your mum a few months ago, October last year. Guys, again, pleasure to have you on the show. And my first question is this an accurate description by your mother?
Yeah, completely. We've known for a while that he's gone through periods of having no light in his cell. He's been in there for nearly 2 years, and there have been periods of, no access to the outside world, no access to doctors. We're well aware of the situation, and he's been in, prolonged solitary confinement. If only we were able to speak to him more. The court mandates that we speak to him once every week. We speak to him once every 2 or 3 months, if that.
I think when that tweet was put out, was actually after large protests in Pakistan about the elections and about just general suppression of democracy in Pakistan. And as a punishment, I think they really ramped up those punishments. No light in the cell, no visitors, and so on.
So I heard that I think he mentioned it himself, and a few others have talked about it, that he's in a death cell, which is essentially not only solitary confinement, but solitary confinement that's mainly aimed at either those with a death sentence or even terrorists. He put out a message himself, I think it was mid last year. He said, quote, "I am confined in a 7 by 8 foot death cell, typically reserved for terrorists to ensure they have no contact with anyone." Can you tell me more about that cell and his conditions, and maybe also give us an idea of the last time you've spoken to your father?
What we know is that he has no access to other prisoners. He is, alone in there. He's occasionally in the pitch black for prolonged periods. There was one period where he was in there for 10 days in the pitch black, no electricity, no nothing. And I remember when I spoke to him about that, he said the first 2 days were beyond difficult, and then he was able to get into a kind of Zen-like mentality, and what ended up being 10 days, he said it could have been a year. The situation in his cell is pretty bleak.
He is, one thing I know about your father, he is a very resilient man. You kind of touched on how he's coping with this. Can you give us an idea of how was it in the early stages when you have those calls with him, and how is it today? Is he still as strong? Is he struggling? I can't even imagine being in the dark for 10 days.
So he's definitely, that's a very accurate description. He's definitely, resilient. He's probably one of I would say, I'm obviously biased, but he is definitely the most resilient person that I know by a distance. Very, very mentally tough. And he sat, whenever we speak to him, he's as strong as ever. But you know, he's not the type of person to complain about the conditions that he's in. Whenever we will always ask how he is, but he'll always sort of brush off those sorts of questions. He's more interested in hearing how we are.
I know he's dealt with it in a way that, you know, is what I think is the right way of dealing with it, is he just reads loads and loads of different parts of historical literature, religious literature, and then he does exercise. And it's his two things that he's always loved in life. So I think in a cell, it suits him in a way to just be able to focus on those two things. And every time we call, you know, we only get to speak to him for about 20 minutes. And around that time, randomly, the line will cut off. So he's so focused on ensuring that he's able to spend the first 10 minutes imparting wisdom of whatever he's learnt, whatever religious or life lessons he can impart on us. And then the last 10 minutes, he's very focused on finding out how we are, what's our situation, how's our family, and things like that. So we don't actually get very much time to ask about how he's coping, but I know he's doing a lot of reading, that's for sure.
So your last call, did you say how long ago was your last call?
2 weeks ago, probably. Yeah, probably the first call we've had with him for about 2 months. But yeah, we were lucky enough to speak to him like 2 weeks ago.
How does that work? So, like, do you know in advance you're going to speak? Like, so, for example, today, do you know when you're going to speak to him next?
No, so it's really chaotic. In fact, I'm glad you asked, because we'll get a message, and it can be sometimes at about 4 a.m. On any day, and it'll suddenly say, "Okay, call coming at 10 a.m." So we have 6 hours, and if we're not awake through that period, then we miss it, which has happened before, and then we have to wait another 3 months before anything comes about. But usually we're able to, you know, we're quite on it with it and are able to rush whatever situation we're in. We cancel, you know, for me, I cancel any meetings, whatever it is, and instantly we jump on. And then often we're left waiting for about an hour, and then eventually the call comes through, and then we have about 20 minutes to speak. So there's no protocol. It's a complete mess.
It just feels like a torture technique. Why do you think they're doing it this way? Why are they treating the former prime minister of the country, and what I consider to be the most popular man in the country? Like, I get people all the time when I meet someone from Pakistan, a lot of times they remember me from that one interview. That interview had more impact, on people talking to me than any leader I've ever interviewed. Just to kind of give an idea to the world of how popular Imran Khan is in Pakistan. And again, he was the former prime minister, a very popular one. Why do you think they're treating him this way?
You hit the nail on the head. It's a technique to try and break him. He's a very, very resilient person, and he's one of the hardest people possible to break. But all of these techniques, you know, shutting off the lights, leaving him in the pitch black, not allowing doctors to go and see him, making sure that all of our calls are at completely random times and that we might miss them, or whatever, not letting us have our court-mandated weekly phone calls. All of this is tactics to try and break him. But he's, you know, good luck, because he's as resilient as they come mentally, and that comes down to his faith. He has strong faith in God, and also he's, you know, always had that kind of mental toughness as well. So it's all torture techniques, exactly as you say.
Another thing, wasn't he offered, because he did an essay not long ago on Time magazine, and he talked about being offered the option or a deal that included house arrest, and he rejected that deal. And I think he had demands. I think he wanted some other people related to his family or as members of his political party. Maybe Sulaiman, can you give me a bit more context on that deal? And kind of him rejecting that deal is another indicator of his resilience.
So I think that's mainly to do with the fact that there are many of his supporters and his party members and family members who are in prison currently in similar conditions to him. So, and he's very, very principled, and he wouldn't, on their behalf, I think that definitely would have played a part. He wouldn't want to kind of, he'd want to be aligned with them.
He's always been kind of very principled, and I don't think he'd go against his principles very on a whim.
What have you guys told him? Like, I'm just imagining if I had my father or a family member in a similar position, and I'd be urging him, because you guys born in London, live in London, so you're away from Pakistani politics. And if I was in your position, I would be convincing my father to do whatever it takes just to get out of jail and just to have his freedom again. Have you guys tried to convince him of doing this?
So actually, when we were younger, when I was younger, I'd hated him being in politics. Would way rather him just do sort of cricket punditry or analysis, and live an easy life in London or out of politics. But it is genuinely his passion, and I don't think he'd feel fulfilled if he wasn't doing what he's doing. I don't think he'd be happy if he was just living a kind of easy life in London, because I think if he wanted to be in exile, he could, but he's genuinely.
He could easily make a deal. Like he would, if from a political perspective, I'm sure they have certain demands. The easiest one is, and this is me speaking, obviously my own opinion, but him speaking in support of the military, for example, or of the opposing political party. Just one example of many of things he could do to gain back his full freedom. But I think his defiance is the reason he's in jail. And do you still, I know you said in casting the same question to you after Suleiman, but do you still try to convince him to get out of politics, or you've kind of given up on that?
No, I mean, I personally would never, I wouldn't even want to say that to him, because imagine you're his son and all he speaks to. So when we spend time with him, a lot of the time we'll be kind of whatever, when we were younger, we were playing cricket with him. Now, watching films, whatever it is, half of the time he's spent lecturing us on rule of law, justice in Pakistan, how, the reasons why he got into politics, we know them so well. And it would be just to go against everything he preaches about, to suddenly just say, okay, I'm going to give up and I'm going to live an easy life. It's not in his nature. He has a single-minded obsession to try and help the people of Pakistan, and it's in such turmoil right now, Pakistan. He's dedicated to it, and he's not going to give up.
And he's always wanted you guys to be out of politics. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, if you look at the two established parties in Pakistan, there's a tradition of it's like dynastic politics. They're dominated by two different families, and so he's always wanted to. He hasn't wanted his party to follow that tradition, So I personally don't ever want to be involved in politics in Pakistan, and I don't think he wants us to be either.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know, Qasim, you're in a similar position. You don't want to be involved you're a very successful entrepreneur as well, so you've got a life outside of politics. And kind of this implies, the answer to my next question is that why do this interview and why now?
So more than anything, we've gone through the legal routes. We've gone through, every route that we thought would potentially get him out. We never thought he would be in there a fraction of how long he's been in there. And it's only getting worse. And so, we've somewhat run out of those options, and now we've decided, okay, the only route is to, of taking action is to come and speak publicly. And I think, I appreciate you for allowing us to speak here about it. What we want is international pressure on Pakistan right now, because currently he's living in inhumane conditions. They're not giving him basic human rights. They're not really doing anywhere near enough, and what we want is global pressure.
Yeah, I think we've, like Qasim said, we've tried. We've exhausted other options, legal avenues, and it's gone very quiet. It seems in the international media, at least, it seems to have gone very quiet, and it's just. It's basically for the human rights of not only our father but other political prisoners, and restoration of proper democracy in Pakistan as well. aside from our own obvious selfish reasons?
Yeah, look, obviously, your selfish reasons. This is your own father, and look, for the international community to understand how crazy things are in Pakistan. Pakistan population. What's the population of Pakistan?
Almost 200 million, I think, maybe over
200 million.
Yeah.
Massive military power, got nuclear weapons, massive economy as well. Because a lot of people in the world don't understand how massive Pakistan is as a country and supposed democracy. And this is kind of me speaking my opinion. I'm a big advocate of democracy and free speech. And what's happened in Pakistan, they literally banned X. X is completely banned, cracked down on protesters. The name of your father was banned from TV, radio stations, I think social media as well. Literally, no one could even say his name. I don't know how anyone could call this a democracy. And what's funny is that people would refer Qasim, they would use your name to refer to your father, Qasim Khan, as a way to defy that ban. And the allegations against your father are mind-bogglingly stupid. Like, I understand this is political targeting, but just went way above any red line one could imagine in any democracy. I mean, I've been very critical of Brazil. Brazil hasn't done near as much as what Pakistan is doing. So it's just honestly heartbreaking what your father's going through and what the country's going through. And again, this is me speaking my opinion. And, you know, I know that you're coming on this interview away from politics and talking more about your father. But I just wanted to kind of mention to anyone listening that's outside of Pakistan what is happening in that country and how important your dad's fight is. You did talk about international pressure on Pakistan, and we've seen a bit of that late last year, and it's kind of quieted down now. I'm not sure why. I want to talk about what Richard Grenell, who's a special envoy in the Trump administration. He essentially openly called for your father's release. I think it's the end of last year, after the elections, after Trump won the elections. He said, "Have you had any contact with it?" Sorry. My question to you first, before I read out his quote: have you had any contact with Richard whatsoever before that quote or afterwards?
So we haven't. We're very grateful to Richard Grenell for all the support he's shown, and I've seen his tweets. But no, we haven't had any contact with him personally. Let
me read out his tweet. This is Richard on Twitter, I think it's November last year. Watch Pakistan. They're Trump-like leaders in prison on phony charges, and the people have been inspired by the US red wave. Stop the political prosecutions around the world. First, he does refer, and I've done the same when I interviewed Imran Khan, for people to relate to Imran Khan's personality. I compared him a lot to President Trump. They've gone through similar political targeting. Trump emerged victorious. Obviously, he's president now, and your father's in jail. What are your thoughts on Richard's characterization in that tweet?
I think there's definitely parallels in the kind of the lawfare and the way he's been targeted. And yeah, I understand. I understand the comparison.
What about he calls them phony charges. He also says that people have been inspired by the US red wave, and he calls it political prosecution, which you've kind of mentioned already. Would you say this is a fair characterization by Richard? And to add to that as well, what would be your message to others in the Trump administration, including Trump and Elon himself, on what they could do to help, if anything, to help your father?
So I think that's definitely a fair characterization when it comes to Pakistani politics. 100%, they're false charges, trumped-up charges. Anyone who looks into it a little bit can kind of see that. In terms of a message to the Trump administration, we'd call for any government that supports free speech and proper democracy to join the call for our father's release, and especially the most powerful leader in the world.
I mean, I completely agree. I mean, what we want is just the international community to look at what's going on and hopefully take action. And who better than Trump to gain the attention of? So, we'd love to speak to Trump or try and figure out a way where he would be able to help out in some way, because, at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is free our father, bring democracy in Pakistan, and just ensure he has basic human rights.
Would you be open, so if there's anyone in the world, anyone with a large following or political influence that would like to help, and this is a question I just thought of now, would you like them to just be public about it? Would you like them to reach out to you guys? What would you What would you recommend? What would you ask people to do?
Both, I think, to definitely speak out about it. I think that's huge. That would be huge, just to create a bit more noise, because it's definitely gone a bit quiet recently. And definitely, if someone had a bit of we would love people to reach out to us if they have some influence or a potential to help with this situation.
I want to read out a quote here from your father, going back to what we talked earlier, because it's not just your father that was targeted. His current wife is in jail. Other family members of his political party have been targeted in different ways. I remember when I interviewed your father, a lot of people within his party were on the run or in different countries worried about family members. I've spoken to many of them privately. I'll read out a quote again from the same essay from your father in Time magazine. He says, "Our social media volunteers, supporters in the diaspora, and activists have had their families harassed and abducted, all in an effort to silence dissent." Have you seen this? Is that true? Have people been abducted that are supporting your father?
Yeah, I think it's been quite widely reported that there have been journalists, supporters, party members who've been abducted, kidnapped. There have been reports of people being tortured. I think that's pretty valid.
Does that worry you guys? Go ahead, Qasim.
Well, no, I was going to say, I mean, Suleiman cautiously says there have been reports. It seems pretty clear, they're giving speeches looking dishevelled and suddenly no longer part of my father's party, PTI, and all of a sudden they're, giving up on politics, and, it's pretty clear.
Is that a reason? So I know I asked you earlier, why are you speaking publicly now? What's the reason you've never spoken before? And maybe going back, and maybe you could describe the early days when your father was arrested. Where were you when you heard about it? What first came to your mind? Did you expect it? I know you already said you wouldn't expect it to take this long. I'd love to know first, why not spoken publicly before? And the early days of the first arrest and release, because there was massive protests, and arrested again when everyone just kind of slowly quieted down.
So we've always been quite private people. It goes back to what we were talking about earlier, where our father never wanted us to be in politics. We were never interested in it anyway. And so it made sense to just live a more quiet life. And that was a good element of living in England, is that we didn't have to live quite so much in the public eye. But I remember very vividly where I was when he got arrested. I was about to give, at the time, the biggest speech of my life for my startup, for Mifu. And I was about to get on stage and speak to about 100 people. And as I was preparing for it, it was about an hour and a half before, my business partner, I see him go pale, and he shows me his phone, and I see that he's been arrested. And at the time, we have quite a thick skin with this kind of stuff. We've seen him get shot. We've seen him get arrested multiple times. We've seen him, he's sat us down and told us he's going against mafias in Pakistan. We're quite used to this kind of thing. So when it happened, frustratingly, I remember I saw it, and I just thought how trivial my speech is, even though it was the biggest speech I could possibly give at the time. And I went up, and I my head was in the clouds, and I fluffed my lines, but we ended up doing okay. But what really stuck out is, at the time, I just, even though it shook me, I had no concept of how long it would be. I really thought it would be a couple of months maybe maximum. But this time, it turned out it's nearly 2 years now, and he's been in solitary confinement the entire time. It's been pretty brutal.
Sulaiman, well, okay, those early days, your expectations, and where we are today.
Yeah, so I remember as well where I was and my reaction, but it wasn't actually a shock to me, because I'd actually spoken to him a few days before, and he'd warned me that there was a strong possibility that he was going to be arrested. But he'd been arrested earlier that year on the 9th or after the 9th of May kind of protests, and he was released a few days later. So I was hoping that it would be a similar situation, yeah. And I just wasn't expecting him to still be in prison now, almost 2 years later.
When he was made that offer, sorry, go ahead, Kasim.
I was just going to say, the very night before, just remembered, the very night before I was, it happened, I was messaging him about advice for public speaking because I was so nervous about speaking to 100 people. And then in the morning, funnily enough, he was taken.
It's just honestly, it's heartbreaking what you guys are going through. At first, I also respect, especially considering Pakistani politics, how always kids are groomed to kind of follow in their father's footsteps. And we've seen that in politics for decades in Pakistan. So to see you guys, first the way Imran Khan has kind of moved you away from politics, so essentially protected you, considering how dangerous Pakistani politics is. And to see how humble you guys are. When we met Qasim, I told you that, I was joking about it, how humble you are in general. And, to see you guys speak publicly now in support of your father, knowing how brutal and aggressive Pakistani military or Pakistani government have been against anyone speaking out in support of your father, is something that I respect massively, and I really appreciate that you're doing this. I do want to ask you the question though. When he was offered the opportunity to go under house arrest to get out of jail, did he ever ask you guys? Is the decision always made, or did he ever ask you, do you think I should accept the deal? Did he ever seek that advice from you guys, or do you know if he's actually asked anyone else in your family about this?
I don't think he would ever. I just don't see him taking a deal like that. To save his skin. He's a very principled person, as I said. He's comfortable there as long as his mission is being fulfilled, and I don't think he'll just take a deal while other people are sitting in cells on his behalf, his supporters. I don't see him, running off to his house where he's in pseudo prison.
Another thing I think people would be very curious about is those calls you have with your father. You talked about him sharing some wisdom, especially with all his readings in jail and things he's learning. Can you tell us some more? And obviously, I'm sure some things are private, but kind of give all the people that are supporting your father and that believe strongly in his cause and have risked their lives on the streets in the protests last year. How are those discussions? What are certain things? What do you think are messages he'd like the world to know as well beyond your private conversations?
So he, one thing, there's a lot of private stuff obviously, and most of it's about family. But occasionally at one point recently, he was laughing about how desperate his opposition are getting. It's not only these kind of torture tactics against him. And he was laughing, now they put me, now I have no contact with the outside world. So when he would sit to see his lawyers, he would say, okay, what's happened in the world? Just very casual. And he's basically just very, very aware of how desperate they are, the censorship. If you didn't know, for the World Cup, the anniversary of the 1992 World Cup, for context, he was the captain of that side that won the World Cup. And in the images for the anniversary, they blurred him out of every single photo or cropped him out of every single photo. So imagine doing that with the captain of the World Cup winning side. And they're that petty. And so he was laughing about that, which is a nice little touch, I guess.
They've cropped his image. Sorry, Salim, I'll let you speak in a bit, but I didn't know about this. This is getting a bit cartoonish. So essentially they've got, there's images of the World Cup, Cricket World Cup, I assume. And he's a captain. I've known Imran Khan before he was Prime Minister. I'm originally from Australia, so Australia's a big cricketing country, so I know about Imran Khan well. And as a cricket star, he's obviously in all those images and posters. They've cropped him out.
Yeah.
So they're not even being kind of considerate or being strategic in their censorship. They're just putting it out there, not caring that they're blocking free speech. Suleiman, maybe same question to you, is like a bit more, those discussions and kind of a sense of how your father is, because he seems, based on what he said so far, beyond resilient, beyond just being strong and getting through it.
Yeah.
Making a joke out of how desperate the opposition party is getting.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that like I said before, he's not really someone to complain about his conditions. I'm sure it is incredibly tough, like given how small his cell is and everything. But
It's 10 days in the dark. It's
yeah,
it's brutal torture method.
yeah, yeah,
Brutal torture method. Let alone
yeah.
cutting out contact and how your phone calls are cut out after 20 minutes.
Yeah.
It's just disgusting treatment that's left for people that have committed heinous crimes, which obviously your father is not even close to fitting that description. But sorry to interrupt you, Sulaiman.
He, on a sort of more positive note, he feels. I think he genuinely feels that he's in the last almost 2 years. He's learnt more and kind of strategically. He's really developed a good kind of roadmap for what he wants in the future. I think he's always optimistic, but he sees it as a very good learning experience. That despite obviously how difficult it is.
Sorry, I was going to say he's always been a big reader, but now he's had so much time to read about historical figures, leaders of the past, and also about faith, and he believes that he's grown more in these past 2 years than he has in the previous 20, and he said those words exactly. As well as how much he's grown mentally, and he says spiritually as well. He says he has, he's been strategizing about what he can do when he's released for Pakistan. He's one of the few people who's coming out of it, hopefully, or how he believes is stronger.
Do you think he will come out of it?
Of course I want to believe that, but the reason why we're here is because, we feel like we're somewhat running out of options from legal options or others. And what's worried us most is that a lot of the pressure on Pakistan, a lot of the news reports, it's all kind of died down, or it's fizzled a lot recently. So the whole reason why we're here is because we are getting worried. We're naturally very worried right now. And
there have even been threats to prosecute him with offences that would carry the death penalty. So, it's pretty. The reason that the reason we're doing this interview is because the situation is getting pretty desperate. We hope.
You can only remain optimistic.
Does he know you're doing this interview?
Yes.
Yeah, we asked him because this is something that he might not be behind. Was what we were worried about. He always likes us to be private and stay away from politics and that whole world. But we asked him on one of the calls. We said, "Do you think it would be okay? We want to do this. We want to see if we can try and help." And he said, "Do it."
How is Imran Khan outside of politics? How is he as a person? What is a side of him that the world does not get to see?
I mean, he's a very, very dedicated father in a way where, in a strange way, as in he's dedicated his life to politics, to the people of Pakistan. In a way, he has millions of children in his mind, I guess. But every chance he would get when we were younger, he would come down to England. When we would go over to Pakistan, he would, take 2 weeks, somehow take 2 weeks to spend just with us, which is such a difficult thing to do for a man as busy as he is. And he's, I don't think people realise that he's that he's funny, I guess. But these days, we haven't seen him in a while. The last time we saw him, he was conducting a rally for his people. For his supporters, and there was an attempt on his life, and this is a slight side point, I guess, but there was an attempt on his life, and he was shot 3 times in the legs, and if it wasn't for one of his supporters pulling down the gun, he would have been shot in the chest, and the supporter unfortunately lost his life in the process. But after that, we obviously rushed out and we went to see him. And God, the journey over there as well. We were in about a convoy of about 15 cars. We were in a bomb-proof car. There was a decoy car. There were a jammer car for detonators. There was armed militia in front and behind. And as we got to the house, we had to make sure our food wasn't poisoned. We had to stay away from windows for sniper threats. It was so chaotic, and it's, such a stressful period. But that was the last time we saw him. That was 2.5 years ago. That was the last time we were able to properly see him and speak to him. And he was, in a wheelchair with bullets. And it's strange to see him in a wheelchair because he's usually such a presence. He still managed to be, despite hobbling about. But he, that was the only time we were able to see him in recent times. And before then, we weren't able to see him much. But in our early life, he would spend as much time as he could possibly make seeing us. We would see him 7 or 8 times a year for prolonged periods. So it's such a dedicated father, and I don't think people really realize that.
You were avoiding the windows because of the risk of snipers. People were checking if your food was poisoned. How do people check that?
Taste it. Is the way.
Holy shit, that's insane.
Well, I mean, no.
What a life.
Be careful where the food came from, mainly. And, when we went there, we had all of our cousins around who all came into the little compound. And I wanted to play cricket with them and things like that. And we weren't allowed outside in the garden, even though there were walls up high. So they were saying, okay, no, there are tall buildings all the way around there. So we couldn't do any of that. And you should have seen the way when we were trying to get from the airport to a car or the car to an airport, we were surrounded like we were penguins around by security, and we kind of shuffled into the car. It was so dramatic, and I don't say it lightly. I mean, because every time we've gone to Pakistan, there's drama, but this last time we went, it was beyond.
Would you feel safe to go there now at all if you could see your father?
Our cousins, we're urged not to go because, our aunties have been arrested. Our cousins have been arrested, some of them in prison still. There's obviously a high threat. If we go, we provide a potential weakness for our father, another way where they can potentially get to him. And so he was always quite worried about us coming during the height of tension, because he was worried, when they're desperate and they're pulling out all of these random ideas, you never know what they might do. But we've obviously thought about it. You never know.
If you had a message to the Pakistani military or the establishment or those in power or those that make the decisions, what would be your message to them?
I would say just respect respect democracy in Pakistan, respect the kind of the people's clear choice, which anyone who has looked into the previous general election can see. They weren't allowed to stand. Our father's party, PTI, their candidates had to run as independents, and they still won the most. And let alone all the other ways they tried to obstruct the democratic process, they still won the most seats in the National Assembly. So it's pretty clear who the people's choice, the party that is the people's choice, and the leader that they've chosen as well. So I would say respect the choice of the Pakistani people.
Exactly, and when you're saying the techniques they used during the last election, in a country with a 40% illiteracy rate, they banned his symbol, which is the bat. Which the cricket bat is obviously synonymous with him. Very easy for anyone to be able to see who they're voting for. They banned it in the days leading up to the election, meaning that a huge proportion, 40% of the country, weren't able to know exactly how to vote for him. So as well as that, there was clear rigging, the most obvious rigging possible. They banned Twitter. They turned off internet for periods. It was, the rigging is so clear.
Probably the most blatant form of, rigging, election interference, censorship that I've seen in any democracy. your father's literally in jail for charges, and maybe before I ask the final two questions, maybe Suleiman, just give us an idea. I've talked about how ridiculous those charges are. What are the alleged things that your father has done that he's being jailed for?
So it's ridiculous. I mean, from things like selling exotic fruits to corruption charges. For me, for anyone who knows our father knows that he's not a corrupt person. If he was a corrupt person, he wouldn't have struggled for 20 years. Started his own party, struggled for 20 years to even be taken seriously in politics. He could have just joined one of the established parties, as they've offered him many times. And amassed wealth that way. But he's not I think even the establishment know that he's not a corrupt person. So it's absurd to charge him with corruption.
Two last questions, guys. Before this interview, considering how sensitive the matter is, considering what's happening in Pakistan, considering the fact that you both have never spoken publicly, what was the reaction of your family? The family's been targeted politically for 2 years, if not more now. What were their reaction to you guys doing this?
Obviously quite hesitant. Some of them were very behind it. I mean, it's a little bit of a mixed bag depending on who you ask. But, I think at the end, what we were able to say, convince them was that, if there's a way that we can help, and if there's any way that we can try and get him out of prison, whether that's pleading to the international community, speaking to people like Trump or whoever it might be, if there's any way that we can make a slight difference, it's worth doing. So we're happy to show our faces publicly for this.
My last question to you guys is: you spoken to your father 2 weeks ago. If he was doing this interview somehow, so we sneaked in a camera and did it live without the guards knowing, what would he say to anyone listening? What would be his message, especially to the people in Pakistan and to the people of the rest of the community?
From our perspective, we can tell you that he's keeping, he will stay strong until he's released, and when he is, hopefully he can make a change.
And guys, what would be your message? What would be your message, Qasim, Suleiman, to the people of Pakistan and to the rest of the world?
Don't lose faith that I can tell you, has not lost faith. He hasn't given up. He's not just sitting in his cell, kind of twiddling his thumbs. He's very much planning for the future, believes that change is coming. So, don't sort of lose faith and keep protesting the injustice. And,
to the international community, I think it's important to say, take action. If you can make a difference, there's someone who's in a solitary confinement cell who is being denied basic human rights. He should be the leader of Pakistan, and instead he's being kept in inhumane conditions, being tortured at periods. So if you care about human rights, this is paramount. This is number one on your list.
Anything else that I missed in terms of what he's going through? Because I think it's very, very important to highlight this to the world.
He would hate me saying it, but he's he's a man in his 70s, and he may be physically younger than that, and he may be physically very strong. But when you look at the facts, he's in his 70s and he's being kept in a tiny cell. And occasionally, the lights are completely turned off, no electricity at points, no access to a doctor, and he's been shot recently 3 times. It's completely inhumane.
To wrap up my message to anyone listening, and I usually don't take many stances as I do my interviews and my coverage, but there's certain instances where I feel like I have no choice. Pakistan is a population, as you guys said, over 200 million. I just checked it, it's 250 million people. It's a nuclear power. It's an economic giant, and more importantly, it's meant to be a democracy. And Imran Khan, as defiant as he is, and I might disagree with a lot of his policies, and I'm sure even you guys might disagree with your father's policies and some things he says, the people have voted for him. And I think the world needs to understand that if you stand idle when one democracy is threatened, and if it works, whoever tries strategy in one democracy, it could be replicated in other democracies. I think it's important to, no matter what your political stance is, to fight for certain values, and democracy is one of them. So I hope your father is out of jail. I hope he's healthy. I hope things change in Pakistan, and I hope you guys could lead a normal life, you and the rest of Imran Khan's family. I really appreciate your time. I appreciate Imran Khan saying okay to this interview, and I hope to be interviewing Imran Khan again, hopefully soon. I really appreciate your time, Qasim and Sulaiman. Thank you, guys.